folks. Welcome to the program. My name is John Feakes. I'm the lead pastor of New Life Sanctuary Church in Winnipeg. And this is going to be part 6 in our series going through our Bible Evidence Museum located in the lower level of the New Life Sanctuary Church building. And to get us started here, I want to read from the Bible very interesting words here from Solomon, who was, next to Jesus Christ, the wisest man that ever lived. But Solomon says this in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 10. He says, "The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool shall swallow him up. The words of his mouth begin with foolishness, and the end of his talk is raving madness." And that is very profound. Solomon is reminding us that if you start with a wrong idea and you take it as truth, and you begin to reason outward from that wrong idea, you're going to end up so far from the truth. In fact, he calls the end of that person's talk raving madness. And we did see some of that, I think, in the previous programs as we discussed Charles Lyell and his wrong-headed ideas about geology and early Earth history, and how those wrong ideas were taken by Charles Darwin and used as a foundation from which he would then try to reason outward. And so we saw that the end of this is really pretty far from the truth. And we want to explore further now. Now, in the last couple episodes, we were looking at geology and we were looking at the age of the earth, and we discussed rocks and fossils and canyons and strata. We discussed radiometric dating and carbon-14 dating and all those kinds of things. And the takeaway from all that is supposed to be simply this. The Bible teaches, if you take the text straightforwardly, and we gave reasons why you should, the Bible teaches that the earth is only probably in the neighborhood of 6,000 years, certainly less than 10,000 years old, okay? Current popular scientific opinion has the earth at something like 4.6 billion years old. A huge discrepancy in terms of time. Scientific investigation can give you, if you're selective, can give you reason to think the earth really is billions of years old. At the same time, legitimate scientific investigation into this can easily bring down the conclusion that the earth is more in the order of 6 or 10,000 years old. Depends on which geochronometers you're looking at, and how much trust are you placing in things like radiometric dating, and is that trust justified? And we looked at some of those things in previous programs. I think that scientifically, historically, certainly biblically, we have no good reason to think this earth is more than around 10,000 years old. And we're not going to rehash all that. We certainly could talk for the next few weeks on just that topic, but I think we're going a little bit slow here. We got to keep moving, or we're never going to get through the museum and then on to other things that we want to talk about. So today we're going to shift gears. Today we want to talk about living things. Today we talk biology, living things. And let's start at the beginning. Let's ask the question, where did living things come from? How did they get here? And of course, you and I know that in the Western world we have two great competing worldviews. They're in head-on collision. They are irreconcilable. One view, the Darwinist view, says that living things emerged on this planet because inanimate matter sort of coalesced somehow, but fully in accordance with the laws of physics and chemistry, into the first living system. Complete with genetic material, complete with the ability to replicate, to pass on descendants, and so on. That's the Darwinian view, that the first living system evolved quite naturalistically in accordance with the laws of physics and chemistry, and the big thing here is there was no intelligent agency at all involved in this. It is purely naturalistic, okay, an unguided process. Well, of course, I'm a Christian, and I can't accept that. The Bible says, in the first chapter of the very first book, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. God made this world. And in that very first chapter of the very first book, God actually tells us what he did, when he did it, and how he did it. God spoke things into being. God spoke the universe into existence. And he created the heavens and the earth and everything that's in them. He did it in 6 days, and he ceased from creating on the seventh day. And we believe right now God's not creating any new things, except for one thing. God is creating new people, spiritually new people. God isn't creating new animals. God isn't, creating new plants. God isn't suddenly, supernaturally, instantaneously creating the way he did at the dawn of universal history. During that 6-day period, he was speaking things into existence. He spoke birds into existence. He spoke animals into existence. He spoke water into existence. Today, he's not doing that anymore, but I tell you what, he's still creating new people on the inside. Anytime a person recognizes under God, is persuaded, divinely persuaded, to believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God who came into the world to die for sinners, to die in their place. Anytime somebody will acknowledge that and fall on their face and confess to God that they're in need of salvation and forgiveness and cleansing, you know what God will do? He will cleanse and forgive that person. He will wipe the record clean. He will declare them innocent. And more than that, he will actually impute Christ's own righteousness to their account. And in fact, something very mysterious happens. When a person is converted, they actually become a new creature spiritually. There's a new birth that takes place there. And Jesus said, you just can't enter heaven unless you're born again. Remember, he said that in John 3. So even though God isn't creating quite the way he did in Genesis 1 during creation week, he's still creating new people. And the way to experience that new birth is just to simply exercise faith in Jesus, enter into that love-trust relationship with Jesus. And he did it for me. He'll do it for you too. If you haven't experienced that yet, I strongly encourage you, come to the Savior. Let him make the changes in you that need to be made, okay? Well, of course, I can't get through a program without talking about those things. But today we want to talk about living things. And again, as a Christian, I just cannot accept the Darwinian account of this as life coming into existence as an unguided process. The Bible says God is the author of living things. God created the first living systems. So you have Darwinism that says living things came into the world through a completely unguided process, and then you have the biblical account that says that no, there was a supernatural intelligent agency, i.e. God, who did this, okay? Okay, so our task, therefore, is to determine, based on the evidence, which worldview is correct. Did life come into being in a completely unguided process, or was intelligent agency involved? And right off the bat, even as we just approach this, I think it's very, very important to notice that some of the most ardent defenders of the Darwinist account of the origin of living things will admit quite openly that living systems at least look intelligently designed. Even, Richard Dawkins, who's about as, the closest thing that we have in the world to a professional atheist, Dawkins himself says that biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. And even Mike Shermer, in a debate with William Dembski, Mike Shermer the skeptic, he admitted that living things really do look designed to us. And then he went on to say that it was evolution that programmed us with this false belief that we should attribute what we see in living things to a top-down personal designer and so on. He doesn't seem to understand that if that's your worldview, that evolutionary processes alone programs us with false beliefs, and that these false beliefs somehow confer upon us an evolutionary advantage, a selective advantage, then you can't be sure that anything in your head is true. You can't even be a skeptic, because to be a skeptic, you have to ask questions, but you can't ask questions unless you have some things nailed down first. And of course, evolution undercuts the validity of all reason. It undercuts whatever foundation you want to stand upon in order to launch out in your question-asking endeavor. It's not going to work, okay? And we talked all about that before. But back to the point, evolutionists themselves, Darwinists themselves, will admit freely that living things look designed. In fact, if you want to describe living things, the structure of even a single-celled animal, you want to get down to the nuts and bolts of what makes this animal tick. You get down into the microcosm of the cell. It is really, really hard to describe what's going on there without bringing in terms that seem to imply purposiveness, that these things are here for a reason. The teleological language, it just sort of comes in, and because living things just look so obviously designed. So from my perspective, if you're going to say living things were not designed, you are the one that's got to shoulder an enormous burden of proof now. We better see some Dino Supreme evidence to make us think that living things were not designed, because they look just so obviously designed. That's key here. And what are we getting from the Darwinian community? What are they giving us? Well, I don't think the evidence is really knocking my socks off. Animals produce within their own kinds. Varieties, yes. Mutations happen, yes. But the kind of genetic change that you see in the world, yes, it can account for some variety, but can you take that kind of genetic change and really extrapolate it out to account for evolutionary change in a Darwinian sense? I say you can't do it. And there's a lot of biologists who say you can't do it. And I think that Darwinism is really on the ropes today. It's going to take a while for that to filter down to the general populace, because this is the pagan nature myth that has really taken root in our culture. But the fact is, scientifically, I don't think it holds up at all. And I think there's a lot of scientists who are smarter than me, who have PhDs in the biological sciences, who say the same thing. And right here, this is where you're going to get this arbitrary remark. It usually comes back in the form of, those aren't real scientists. You're often going to hear this. All real scientists are Darwinists. All real scientists believe in evolution. Well, of course, that's arbitrary, and therefore I can make the reversible claim with equal validity, can't I? I can turn around and say, no, all real scientists believe in special creation. You know, you need something more than an arbitrary remark like that. What we all agree on is that living things at least look designed. Now, guys like Richard Dawkins would say it's an illusion. In fact, he says it's such a powerful illusion, it took to the mid-19th century for us to realize it's an illusion, right? And of course, he's talking about Charles Darwin and his book on the origin of species. Well, you know, Darwin wrote that book long before we knew about the microcosm of the cell, before we understood DNA, before we understood genetics, before we understood that within the microcosm of the cell, you have tiny molecular machines and motors and information-rich storage and retrieval systems. We want to talk about all those in future programs. Darwin had no idea about any of that. And so his cursory look at living things and his observation that living things produce varieties within their kinds, that's all very good observation. But to extrapolate backwards and to suggest that all living things share a common ancestor, and that common ancestor itself arose through purely naturalistic processes, that just doesn't make any sense nowadays, not knowing what we know. And it's just unfortunate that Darwinism has taken such a deep root now in our world, in this Western world, that it just colors everything. But you know what? I think I can see it starting to creak. I can see the structure beginning to crack. Its foundations are starting to crack. And I don't know what the non-believing world's going to do next, because it was Darwin, according to Richard Dawkins, it was Darwin that made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. You know, get the force of that one. If you wanted to be an atheist before Darwin, you could deny God because maybe you saw evil and human suffering in the world. You may have other reasons for denying God. But there was always this appearance of design in the created order. You just take a look at an animal. You take a look at a dragonfly. Or you take a look at a bird. Or just take a look at any animal. Take a look at a giraffe or a whale or something. The creature looks just so obviously designed to do what it's doing And that was powerful evidence that the world did not come into being uncaused out of nothing, that the world is purposeless and random. No, you look at biological systems and they just cry out to you, there's a creator behind all this. And that would be really hard for the atheist to have to cope with. And it's Richard Dawkins who reminded us that it was Darwin that made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist, which implies that before the evolution story was advanced by Darwin, if you were an atheist, you were not intellectually fulfilled. You know, it was Darwin that made that possible. So I can see that Darwinism has very, very profound religious implications, every bit as much as the intelligent design theory has religious implications. Both views have religious implications. So this idea that you're not even allowed to consider intelligent design as an explanation for the origin of living things because it has religious implications, that's ridiculous. You know, whatever theory you come up with, of course it's going to have religious implications. Now, intelligent design theory is a bona fide scientific theory. That's really important that we get that out there. Intelligent design theory, of course, is friendly to Christian theism, but it's not exclusively Christian in its outlook and foundations, okay? There are intelligent design advocates who are agnostic. There are intelligent design advocates who are Muslim. There's even some who are Buddhist. They follow some branch within Buddhism. Intelligent design theory is a bona fide scientific theory, and it recognizes widely accepted principles of design detection. When the intelligent design theorist infers that living things were designed, he is employing a very common pattern of reasoning. And his inference is a principled inference. I've got to get this out there because this is so important. The intelligent design theorists, and a lot of them are clustered in Seattle at the Discovery Institute, headed up by Stephen Meyer and others, they always get slammed by the Darwinian community as being just a bunch of creationists. You're just a bunch of young earth creationists. You're just a bunch of religious zealots masquerading as scientists and so on. That charge is, just not at all fair. Those men are not just a bunch of fakey scientists trying to push a religious agenda. That is not what they're doing. Again, they're employing widely accepted principles of design detection. Scientists, archaeologists, forensic scientists, they employ these things all the time. Patterns that they're looking for, design detection methods. And they bring down a principled conclusion, a rational inference that living things were designed. And just really quickly here, because I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you see behind me, we have the DNA molecule there on the wall. The DNA molecule is the most complicated molecule in the universe as far as we know. And it was in the 1950s that its information storing properties were discovered. The DNA molecule spells out in code the recipe for making you. You know, in the nucleus of the cells of your body is the recipe expressed chemically on the DNA molecule for making you. Now, the question is, how do you get an information-rich storage and retrieval system like that one? I mean, that is absolutely far more, unspeakably more complicated and sophisticated and efficient than even the greatest computer systems that we're able to manufacture today. And even the guys in Seattle at Microsoft have made comments like that. They're in on this. They admit it. Now, the intelligent design movement has a two-pronged argument that brings down, I think, very rationally, very properly, the conclusion that living things were very probably designed. And believe it or not, they're actually employing the thinking of Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin. Remember, Lyell said, the present is the key to the past. So if you want to explain how a certain feature in the world got here, you just look to causes now in operation known to produce a thing like that, right? If you're walking around and you come across a layer of ash, you know that volcanoes produce ash. It could have been a volcano. But you're not going to say an earthquake produced the ash, because earthquakes have never been seen to do such a thing, right? You look for causes now in operation known to produce the effect that you're studying, okay? Now, we're talking about information-rich storage and retrieval systems like the genetic code and the translation equipment and all the machinery that can translate and follow those instructions and build the proteins that are coded for in that DNA molecule. Well, the first prong in the intelligent design argument is to point out that there are no naturalistic processes that we've ever observed that could even come close to creating an information-rich system like that one. Not even close. We can't do it in the laboratory. We can't even coax this along in the laboratory. I mean, it's incredible to suggest that the early Earth, without lab techs there guiding the process along, could produce even an RNA molecule. It just cannot be done. Let alone the DNA molecule and all the translation equipment needed to read it and follow the instructions. Well, on the other hand, this is the second prong of the intelligent design argument. On the other hand, there is one cause now in operation that does create and produce information-rich storage and retrieval systems, and that is intelligent agency. Okay, and I have an example for you here. Now, I got this book in my library. This is a book by Colin J. Hemer. It's a fantastic book. It's called The Book of Acts in the Setting of Hellenistic History. And in our Shepherd's Voice programs, one day we're going to get to this book. I don't know when that will be, but the point here is, here you have a book, and it is chock full of information expressed for you. See that? And the information, we understand, actually transcends the medium, because you could write that book in German or some other language, couldn't you? Or you could store it on your computer. The fact is, information is a non-material entity. You can express it with material media, but information is non-material. That's important, because now we want to get down to asking the hard question: where did the information come from that's being expressed chemically on the DNA molecule? Where did it come from? Well, we know that intelligent agency is habitually, continually associated with information-rich systems. We write books, we write computer code, we create computer systems. I think it is a very, very reasonable inference to suggest that living things were designed and created by someone very, very intelligent. There's an intelligent guiding agency there. The intelligent design theory is a bona fide scientific theory. It uses familiar patterns of reasoning. The inference is a principled inference. It may be friendly to Christian theism, but it's not exclusive to Christian theism, okay? Okay, I'm going to close off this program here, because I fear we're going to go way too long if I go off like I want to, all right? But when we return, let's get back into this. Let's look at living things. And let's look at features of living things. Let's look at some specific animals that absolutely defy a Darwinian explanation, but seem to cry out intelligent design. And of course, I would say the designer is the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who has revealed himself decisively in the person of Jesus. Okay? All right, with that, I'm going to close off the program. I hope I've given you lots to think about. I look forward to visiting with you next time, dear friend. God bless you. See you soon.